The increasing use of digital tools, platforms, and resources by musicians, music librarians, and music scholars have drastically increased their ability to preserve, provide access to, and represent musical information. The innovatively designed projects built from these tools have likewise created new methods for publishing and presenting research. By moving outside traditional means of authorship and publication, the digital space also requires us to examine the implication for researchers and users approaching materials presented on these platforms. To explore these questions, today we'll be focusing on a project built from the Music Encoding Initiative. The Music Encoding Initiative, or MEI, is a term that represents a musical markup language, the organization responsible for its formation, and the larger research community formed around its use. MEI is open source and is expressed as Extensible Markup Language, or XML. I'll note that MEI is one of a number of formats for marking up or encoding music, some of the others being Music XML, Humdrum, or Plain and Easy. MEI is capable of representing the semantics and structure of music notation as well as expressive features found in facsimile, critical and performance editions, and metadata. Begun by Perry Rowland at the University of Virginia in 1999, the now international community of users bring together music researchers, librarians, musicologists, and theorists to define best practices for encoding musical documents in machine-readable structures. XML is a language used to describe other languages. For text, this means the ability to define characteristics around words in text, including punctuation and notes that might indicate process, historical context, or biographical information. For music, this means that it expresses both musical notation, information surrounding the notation like dynamics, articulation, and directives, as well as historical information. XML is distinct in its emphasis of descriptive markup, ability to distinguish syntax, and independence from specific hardware or software. Within the musical community, MEI is used for cataloging, creating sources for performance and study, and new digital presentations of historical or analytical research. MEI has been used to create an ever-growing number of projects, including a catalog of Carl Nielsen's works, community-based reconstructions of Gesualdo's works, and presentations of mensural polyphonic works in multiple notation formats. These are just a few of the projects that are built using MEI. One of the longest-term projects is the Beethoven Werkstatt, a cooperative 16-year project between the Beethoven House Bonn and the Musicological Seminar Detmold, funded by the Academy of Research and Literature Mainz. Translated as Beethoven's Workshop, this digital collection encodes various stages of the composer's manuscripts using MEI. The result explores the highly dynamic compositional process of Beethoven's works by engaging in comparisons of reconstructed autographs. We'll return to this example to examine it in more detail. The use of MEI to create new digital projects raises questions around the nature of authorship, the categorization of these new sources of information, and providing context for users. Does the creation of a digital representation of a score, a digital collection or catalog of scores, or a digital means for human or computer analysis of scores constitute a scholarly publication? If so, how do we categorize and label these projects? Finally, how are users informed of the significance of research and labor that lies behind their creation? Drawing on language developed in a paper discussing the typology of digital collections by my co-authors Katrina Courtney and myself, these digital scores are referred to as digital derivatives, as they derive their content from pre-existing material and use that primary source as their basis. These digital sources are in turn used by many scholars as primary evidence in their own research. However, they are created with the attributes of a secondary source, building new understanding through significant original authorship in the form of organization, contextualization, combinations of sources, and methods of presentation. Certainly, they draw on a long history of critical editions in the analog world. However, in the digital space, the significant work of creating these projects can be lost in the beauty of the interface and the ease of interaction with information. Through our paper today, we'll engage in an examination of these sources, drawing on the Beethoven's Werkstatt as our primary example. As established, the Beethoven's Werkstatt represents perhaps the most long-term commitment and a particularly well-funded use of MEI. The funded working group includes researchers, editors, and musicologists. Begun in 2014 and now in its fifth year, the project combines genetic text criticism and digital forms of presenting research. The project aims to explore the genesis of Beethoven's musical works through aligning various stages of manuscripts and encoding them for comparative purposes. The fully encoded machine-readable edition hopes to illustrate his compositional process as well as enable examination of his legacy into the 19th and 20th centuries. Currently, the web pages are in German only. The project is organized in 5 modules that each contemplate a different aspect of the compositional process, thematic variation, and organization of musical material, with each module building on the previous. The first module, developed from 2014 to 2016, focused on presenting variants. In this project, MEI is used to align digital facsimiles of musical scores and to store a digital critical report with all notable annotations. It subsequently uses the Edaram editor to prepare the encoded musical editions. Edaram was specifically developed for digital forms of critical music editions. It is a collection of tools for editing content as well as for displaying that content. The coding is linked to the high-resolution facsimiles of the Beethoven Hausbahn using scalable vector graphics. The musical sketches and scores are displayed with Verovio, which engraves MEI data into modern notation. The example worked on in the first prototype comes from the autograph manuscript Beethoven Hausbahn BH71 of the first movement of the Piano Sonata Opus 111 in C minor, which Beethoven began in 1822. On the interface in the center of the page, you'll see the facsimile of the manuscript that you can zoom into. You'll also notice that many of the gestures are able to be selected, and when you do so, it does open up a little info box in the lower left-hand corner. Now zooming back out, we can also make use of the selection box on the right-hand side. Here you can select a variant and see that highlighted in a different color according to the variant box. So we'll see here variant A and then variant B. They are, of course, very much the same material with the exception of that last note here. Now, opening the tab on the right-hand side, we can see the variants displayed in an edited transcription to make it legible and understandable. Here we can see that variant B replaces that left note, that F, with an E flat. The next tab down gives the explanation of the text genesis by linking explanatory text with the facsimile. So we can see again, if we come down to variant B and that F that was turned into an E flat, it will take us right here to that moment in the facsimile. Finally, the last tab is the MEI coding on which the prototype is based and is viewable here. While we won't have time to get into all of the modules today, the second focuses on Beethoven as arranger of his own works, while the third will present a search for the text through original editions, variant prints, and Beethoven's own correction lists. The fourth module is slated to be a sketchbook edition, while the fifth module will combine concepts explored in all previous modules to present the first edition, source edition of the autograph score, and a genetic edition of the Diabelli Variations Opus 120, which seems to instigate a new discussion on fixity. This innovative project clearly demonstrates that there is an immense amount of research and expertise behind the encoding of these archival documents and their contextualization and presentation online. And while the team members and their credentials are all included on the website, there still exists a gap between the field's definitions of scholarly publication and the work being done and presented in the digital space. In interviews our research team conducted on the sustainability of digital collections, not solely limited to the musical realm, one scholar even posited that the digital projects are difficult to sustain because while graduate students and tenured faculty might be involved, individuals working towards tenure often focused on real publications that would hold weight in tenure and promotion packages. There is a clear difference between examining primary archival materials, even those that have been digitized, and the immense added value made by encoding using MEI, contextualization, and navigation of the interface. However, without emphasis on the expert creation of these projects, users might be inclined to view them as mere digital representations of primary sources. These digital projects, exemplified by the Beethovenswerkstatt, necessitate a reevaluation of the nature of authorship, the categorization of these projects as information sources, and how users approach such projects. To answer these questions, it is helpful to draw on the rich history of critical and scholarly editions in their traditional sense. Within the scholarly musical discipline, these are quite common and are a helpful tool in studying the compositional process, examining variants, determining historical performance practice, and imbuing a score with historical details. The Oxford Companion to Music defines a critical edition as based on scholarly evaluation and collation of sources that take into account variant readings and contemporary performance. Modeled on the critical editing of literary classics, they came into existence in the mid 18th century following the establishment of the classical canon. In this case, the editor makes decisions based on primary sources, secondary sources, and knowledge as an expert on that composer or repertory. These editions also identify their sources, reasoning, and variants in decisions documented through appendices or footnotes. Within this established tradition, the critical or scholarly edition is considered a secondary source which recognizes the research, expertise, and labor on the part of the editor. Examples of these works abound, but keeping with our Beethoven theme, one of the most recognized examples is the Beethoven Eroica sketchbook, transcribed and edited by Lewis Lockwood and Alan Gozman. Among Beethoven's surviving sketchbooks, this is by far the most famous and contains all the known sketches for his Third Symphony, in addition to some initial sketches for Fidelio and material eventually included in the Fourth Piano Concerto and the Fifth and Sixth Symphonies. This critical edition includes the complete facsimile of the sketchbook, along with Lockwood and Gozman's expert commentary on their origins and significance. Certainly all credit is due to Lockwood and Gozman for their work in producing this edition. This practice is recognized for its valuable contributions to the field, and many serious scholars engage in critical editions on the works of the composers they've developed expertise in. It is so widespread, in fact, that in 1996, musicologist James Greer published a monograph entitled The Critical Editing of Music: History, Method, and Practice. In it, he describes editing as a series of choices, educated, critically informed choices. In short, the act of interpretation. Editing, moreover, consists of the interaction between the authority of the composer and the authority of the editor. Indeed, so prolific is this practice that in 1997, a bibliography of collected editions, historical series, and sets and monuments of music was published by editors George R. Hill and Norris L. Stevens, instigated by a group of musicologists and music librarians at the 1983 meeting of the MLA in Philadelphia. They intended to create a bibliography of editions edited according to those sound musicological principles. If the research, expertise, and labor that goes into the creation of the musical edition is so widely recognized and has been for over a century, where does that leave us in the digital realm? Certainly, the most hopeful signal for the growing validity of digital projects is Eleanor Selfridge Field's 2015 article, Hybrid Critical Editions of Opera: Motives, Milestones, and Quandaries, published in Notes. In it, she posits that digital publishing's intrinsic flexibility gave it a distinct advantage over the fixity of printed editions, particularly in historically fluid genres like opera. However, while the hybrid critical edition appears to retain enough basis in the tradition of the critical edition and still includes some physically published components, it is left unclear how far our acceptance of scholarly work extends into the digital space. A number of digital humanities and digital archive scholars have commented on the authorship created through the mediation of original works, in this case the autograph sketches and manuscripts, through the encoding and presentation in the digital space. Certainly many connected directly to that long history of critical editions, informed by the cultural turn that sees text not as a static object, but as one that requires multiple interpretations and contextualization. Drawing on this connection, Trevor Munoz has posited that the term publishing, which in scholarly communities has come to mean the activities that include creation, vetting, and circulation of knowledge, is changing with regards to the digital space. In his argument, data curation encompasses these activities as well as the additional interplay of theory, data, and computational methods that are integral to much of digital humanities scholarship. He argues that this enlarged definition of publishing be applied to the work of digital curation and that this publication be considered for library and digital humanities scholars as analogous to the work of preparing and circulating monographs or journal articles, again aligning the work with secondary sources. In this case study, the Beethoven's Werkstatt working group has encoded, provided contextual information, and created compositional narrative through the elucidation of the artist's process. However, in the digital space, the presentation of information and object is made with less obvious reference to the creator of the added material. It even seems that the more seamless an interface looks, the less obvious the traces of human authorship become. The editing is hidden behind the interface. It might be that the intensely collaborative nature of these projects, with a wide range of contributors, including librarians, academics, students, and technologists, also differs to such a degree from traditional authorship that it makes it difficult to define. In a 2017 article, Alex Poole recognized that while these individuals added both value and content, that the role of the digital curator certainly changes the user experience of items accessed on digital platforms, evidence of their work is often invisible. The role of the critical editor has been clear and recognized in the realm of physical publication. How can this be properly translated to scholarly recognition of the high degree of research, expertise, and scholarship put into digital publications? Creators of these projects deserve proper credit, and the works deserve to be recognized as publications. Users should understand the amount of mediation that goes into presenting this information. To appropriately name and validate digital projects, particularly those quickly developing in the field of digital musicology, we need an improved understanding of authorship and publication in the digital landscape. Distinguishing these projects would recognize the primary sources they are created from and around, their platform, the significant mediation foundational to their creation, and the fundamentally new type of publication they represent. It is clear that in addition to using MEI to encode, examine, and present comparative and generative models of Beethoven's compositional process, that Beethoven's Werkstatt has engaged in significant new authorship. These digital sources appear to reside between the primary and secondary source, providing high-quality access to primary sources, but with a level of expert intervention in the construction and presentation of the materials that constitutes an authorship of its own. They deserve to be recognized as such, giving creators full credit and users full understanding of the information they are accessing. Doing so necessarily updates our conception of creators, scholarly publication, and information seekers for our increasingly digital landscape. Thank you. We'll be happy to take your questions.